Queen of the Ocean. That was how the Titanic was known even before its maiden voyage and its last. The few survivors rewrote their destinies, but those who sank with the Titanic have their stories told over and over again.
I am a great-grandson of Isidore and Ida Strauss, who lost their lives when the Titanic sank.
And 100 years later, they turned to life again. This is a beautiful love story and of courage.
Women and children began to board the lifeboats under the ship's officers' directions, and so my great-grandmother, Ida, stepped into a lifeboat, expecting that her husband would follow. Her husband said no, that he would not board a lifeboat until all the women and children on the ship were in lifeboats. At that point, the ship's officer said, "But Mr. Strauss, we all know who you are." He had been a member of the United States Congress, the owner of R.H. Macy's, and a fairly well-known person in America. Of course, we would make an exception for you, Mr. Strauss, to enter a lifeboat and be with your wife. And he said, "No, I will not do that. It's not the right thing to do."
When Ida realized that Isidore would not get into the boat, she stepped out and told him,
"We have lived a long and wonderful life together. We've been married for over 40 years. We have our children. If you are staying on board, I will stay on board, and we will die as we have lived together."
The survivors told that the couple went to the other side of the boat, holding arms, and then
a big wave came up over the deck and swept my great-grandparents into the ocean. And my great-grandmother had on a very nice full-length fur coat. She took off her fur coat when she saw that her maid, a woman named Ellen Bird, had gone into a lifeboat, and gave it to her and said, "Ellen, I won't be needing this anymore."
Isidore's body was recovered, but Ida's was never found. From his great-grandfather's pocket, Paul keeps a very precious memory.
It's a gold locket with an onyx cover with his initials, I.S., Isidore Strauss, and inside the pictures of his eldest son, Jesse, and his eldest daughter, Sarah.
Because of the centennial, several members of the Strauss family got together to make their memories alive. In New York, it is possible to find many tributes to the Strausses. Not very far from his home, Paul visits sometimes the park in honor to his great-grandparents. Also aboard the Titanic and returning from a trip to Europe were Sharon's great-grandparents.
Great-grandfather was on the ship, and I want to memorialize his name. My great-grandmother did survive. She was saved on lifeboat number 4, the last solid lifeboat to leave the ship.
To pay tribute, Sharon will be aboard a memorial cruise. The idea came up 5 years ago when a client mentioned his wish to the British travel agency, Miles Morgan Travel. Its owner couldn't say no, and now launches the project.
We've chartered 2 ships, one from Southampton, England, and one from New York.
The other ship, Azamara Journey, on which TVI was aboard, sails from New York 2 days later. The 2 ships will meet in the North Atlantic at the same time, at the same spot where the Titanic sank 100 years later. Here, a memorial service will be held.
Where we will hold a memorial service at 0100 hours on the 15th of April and conclude the service at 0220 hours, 15 April.
This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Sharon. She will travel to the spot where her great-grandfather died and where at the bottom of the ocean the shipwreck still lies.
I want to acknowledge his having been here, and I can do that, I think, at the memorial service. Yes, it's going to be very emotional.
Besides Sharon, another 50 victims' family members will go to the spot. But this cruise similarities with the Titanic go beyond its path.
I've been looking almost everywhere, as well on internet or different kind of books, and I found some very good recipes that were actually the original ones served 100 years ago on the Titanic for the last voyage.
The trip aboard the luxurious Azamara can reach almost $7,000. Yet, on the Titanic, a trip in first class would cost $60,000 in actual currency. April 14, 1912. The unsinkable cruise from the British company White Star ignored the ice alerts and, speeding at about 40 kilometers per hour, collided with an iceberg. The damage was enough to cause the water to enter the ship at a high speed. There was too little time before the boat sank and to save the thousands of people on board. Dramatic moments followed. The 20 lifeboats were not enough, not even for half, and many left almost empty. Women and children had priority, but only the ones in first class. The others stayed behind. The ship Carpathia was the first one to respond, but it was 4 hours away. No land in sight, and without any immediate rescue, 2 hours and 40 minutes was what it took for the ship to sink. This arch is what is left from the pier where the 705 survivors arrived, already without the joy with which they had sailed aboard the biggest and most luxurious ship ever made. But what failed? A century later, what do experts say about the biggest maritime disaster of all time?
Like all accidents, it's a succession of things which contributed to the loss of the Titanic. So you could say they didn't have enough lifeboats, perhaps the lookouts, perhaps the ice. So there was many contributing factors. Were they going too fast? There were reports they were going too fast for the conditions.
The ship did not have enough lifeboats or life-saving equipment for the 2,200 passengers and crew, so 1,500 died unnecessarily.
The transatlantic was the size of almost 3 soccer stadiums. Aboard were some people from the American and European high society. The others in general were searching for the El Dorado. Among them were 4 Portuguese. For 3 of them, it was their first trip ever. None of them survived.
They were very class divided. You had the very rich aristocratic up top in the beautiful accommodations, and then you had the sort of poor immigrants down below in steerage. So you had a microcosm of society, both worlds, the world of the rich and the world of the poor.
Aboard the Azamara, descendants and enthusiastic people from Titanic have now their chance to pay tributes to more than 2,220 people that died from drowning or hypothermia in one of the biggest human disasters. In New York, we found a collector.
Hello.
Hello, are you Joe?
I'm Joe Titanic. Please come in.
The passion for the Titanic started 30 years ago. Joe also met with the 2 last survivors.
Well, Eva was 7 years old on Titanic. She was traveling with her mother and father. They come from Southampton, England, and they were coming to New York to go to Canada to open up a drugstore business. Mavina Dean was 9 weeks old on Titanic. She was the true Titanic baby. And she was traveling with her mother, father, and her 2-year-old brother was 2 years older than she was. Of course, the father went down with the ship. They were coming to New York to go to Kansas City to open up a tobacco business.
Joe has all the movies on the Titanic. His favorite is the one from James Cameron, in which Isadore and Ida are portrayed. Another true chapter is also mentioned by Cameron, the moment in which the band keeps playing, ignoring their fate.
They did that. They went on the boat deck and they saw, because they didn't want people to panic, and they didn't want people to really realize how serious the problem was in the beginning. And people didn't.
This is just one of the chapters that makes Titanic's history unique. But why did it become the biggest disaster of all times?
The arrogance was that they were creating a ship that was testing infallibility. It was said to be unsinkable. It would be like having a baby that could never die. The ship, they said, could never sink. And what happened? It sank on its maiden voyage.
For all these reasons, the sinking of the Titanic was also a big moment for the media at the time. In fact, the tragedy put on the map the most reputable newspaper of our times.
I would say it's the biggest disaster story of the century because it symbolized so many things. It was certainly the biggest story for the New York Times. 9/11, to the extent that a lot of people were killed, and it was just this unbelievable tragedy that so affected New York and the nation and the world.
But can anyone be blamed for this tragedy?
Guilty is a very difficult issue, but I would say it would have to be the fact that the line and the ship's officers, they were racing to come to New York, they ignored the warnings and so forth. They wanted to be on time, maiden voyage, they didn't want to be late, so they took a great chance, and I'm afraid the risk failed.
The investigation concluded that there was a succession of mistakes, from the lack of lifeboats to the miscommunications. It changed the world of maritime travel forever. The Titanic never got to its destination, but it surely became the most famous ship of all time. Today, a century of history finally allowed the Titanic wreck to become World Heritage.